Welcome to the Liberty Collaborative, where the past meets the present in the fight for freedom. We uncover the roots of liberty, spotlight the people who shaped it, and explore what it takes to preserve it today. If you're ready to think deeper, stand stronger, and act with purpose, you're in the right place. Let's reclaim what matters most.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Aaron Bowman. I am your host for the Liberty Collaborative. And today, as always, I am joined with Mike Hancock from Colorado, who is the writer, CEO, and executive of the Undercurrent on Substack. Also joined with us is Chris Coyle, the founder of Wins Lab here in this great state, Constitution state of Connecticut. And last but not least, K. Carl Smith, the founder of the Frederick Douglass Engagement Method. So welcome, fellas, on another Thursday morning here with Liberty Collaboratives. And boy, do we have a show today.
Looking forward to it.
So, Chris, let's get into today. Well, I guess, Chris, do you want to recap what we did last week?
Sure. Guys, the series, as you might remember, is the Brawl of the Branches. Is there really a constitutional crisis? Or is this the design dynamic friction between the branches? I think our team really views it as the latter case, certainly not a constitutional crisis. And the first episode, we talked about the wording and the word choices. Michael, you had a lot of insight on this invention of terms and then spew it out to the media who keeps repeating it as if it's true. The second session, we dug into the judiciary. And what a great time to do it, because we had this Supreme Court decision that really put the kibosh on a single district court, putting a nationwide injunction, some pretty strong words between the majority justices and the dissenting justices. And this week, it's the executive branch. And again, what a better time, whether you like Trump or don't like him, there are some consequential executive branch decisions and actions being taken. So really the goal for us, guys, Mike, I'll throw it to you. We like to provide context and content that the mainstream media often doesn't provide.
Well, Chris, here at the Liberty Collaborative, we specialize, I always like to say this, in ruining perfectly good propaganda. While everyone else is busy parroting talking points and pretending context is optional, we're out here dragging the truth out in full daylight, kicking, screaming, and fact check. We expose the sleazy word games, the bait and switch logic, and those narratives that fall apart the moment you ask for context and or ask even a real question. They stop cold.
You mean an example, perhaps?
Yeah, a simple example. So if you're sick of being emotionally manipulated by people who think you're too dumb to notice, welcome home. We see it, we say it, and we don't apologize for it.
Yeah, and K. Carl, historical perspective, that's almost entirely missing. It says this is unprecedented, never before in history. Most of those claims are patently false.
But you know what? For presidents who have the moral courage to be leaders and tell the truth, Abraham Lincoln, Donald Trump. And look, everybody can have opinions, but you still got to know what the hell you're talking about. And that's what we're going to provide for you.
Fantastic.
That sounds good. So I guess since we're talking about the executive branch, I actually have my Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States here in my little book, because there's something I want to read out of Article 2, Section 3 at some point during today. But I guess we should start with defining what the job is of the executive branch. I think that's a good place to start. What do you all think?
You bet. And, when they get to it, I went back to read the Declaration of Independence, and given that they've been accusing Trump of being a king, and our Declaration of Independence provides, I think it is 28 specific examples against the king. I'd love to bring that up at some point. Aaron, do you want to start off with what is the constitutional basis for the executive branch?
Yeah, so for me, it's to faithfully execute the laws passed by the legislative branch. I guess that would probably be the best way to describe what the executive branch role is when it comes to the laws that are made in the legislative branch. And this is where, I started looking into the Constitution. And if you go into Article 2, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution, it says the president shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed. And I think that's kind of what we need to keep in mind when it comes to all of the rhetoric that we hear from the different talking points and the news cycles that, oh, Trump's doing this, Trump's doing that. And I did a quick search while you guys were talking this morning. And as of May 27th, 2025, Donald Trump has signed a total of 157 executive orders during his second term, bringing his total to 377 executive orders across both terms. Now, while we're talking, I want to try to see if I can dig down into that and to see what the difference is between what he's done and other presidents before him. But to answer the initial question, it's to faithfully execute the laws passed by the legislative branch. I think that's what I would go with. I don't know about you, K. Carl. Do you have anything? How did you put it last episode? Your civics courses from elementary school or something like that. I forgot how you put it, but it was kind of funny.
Well, I don't know what you're referring to. I have a short memory, but no, what you just said is right. And thank God that we have leaders who have the moral courage to be truth tellers. What I was trying to say earlier, and who are all about liberty and defending our constitutional uh, principles, our first principle of our nation, and that's the Frederick Douglass Republic perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sorry, my voice just got really loud there. And if I remember correctly, I have some stuff here from Frederick Douglass pulled up. And one of the quotes, if this is correct, if I have this right, K. Carl, correct me if I'm wrong, that the life of a nation is secure only while the nation is honest, truthful, and victorious.
Uh,
Is that
giving
right?
giving intellectual honesty. They they say Douglas has said that, but there's no documentation to actually say that Douglas actually said those words. But
Okay.
there's not in any of his speeches.
Oh, okay.
But I do love the quote, by the way.
Okay.
Michael, I'm just curious, and everybody listening and our team here, what's fascinating about the constitutional provision is that historically Congress has given the executive branch more and more leeway, allowed them to create agencies. So it's got the largest group of people creating not really a law, but a regulation with the force of law. And so you have this kind of congressional ceding of authority to the executive branch. You have, and I looked up, Aaron, that many executive orders from many presidents are often not even rescinded by the incoming or the next president, but very few of them are found unconstitutional. And those that are typically, and I mentioned this in a previous show, on the same grounds that there is a violation of some constitutional right, or there was some administrative procedure, or the third is that it was outside the bounds of the authority granted by Congress. Typically, those are subject to argumentation. But Michael, how do we explain to the listeners what is sort of the scope and boundary of the executive branch today?
I'm glad you asked that question, Chris, because one of the things that I found, the deeper I dig into the Constitution and how things work, I'm absolutely amazed at the genius of our founders. We've got a system that is designed to really work perfectly and to across time move toward that vision of a more perfect nation. So any law that is passed at any point in time over the course of time can be actually challenged. It's constitutional because if Congress passes a law, that law may be unconstitutional. And the system is set up to ultimately catch that over time. An executive order can be issued that ultimately ends up being unconstitutional or found to be constitutional. Or a judicial ruling in and of itself can make a ruling that is an unconstitutional ruling, which is the case in terms of Roe versus Wade. That was not a ruling of constitutionality. That was an action by the court that had it legislating from the bench. So we've got the system. Some like to say, "Oh, it's so complex," but it's beautifully, I think, simple. It's set up such that there's that tension between the various different branches of the government, and over time, things are really meant to create what they intended in the first place: a more perfect union.
We're in a political context. We can't avoid it. Our show tries to give context. and history perspective. But we've got to help our listeners understand. I've been bothered by and curious on or about all the claims and the most recent marches in the Kings, no Kings. I see stickers in cars. Apparently, they're on to their next theme. But I found it very interesting that all this claim of authoritarian, even twisted AI engines like Perplexity that I want to give people a warning about in a minute. But I went back and said, okay, when someone has a claim or a charge against someone, they typically, as you said, Kay Carly, you were talking about, Michael, they give facts, they give circumstances. And I went back to our Declaration of Independence, and right in the beginning, there are 28 charges against the king. So this was a real king doing real things against the colonies of the United States. And what it was notable is, if you read about it, the words "facts to a candid world," those were added. And the historians say it was added so they could put emphasis on the credibility of the claims against the king, that they weren't just local grievances, but these were claims against the rights of mankind themselves. It set up the Declaration of Independence. So I look at this today, I look at these specifics, and I say, where has anyone specifically said, or what has Trump done that, to your guys' point, could be brought to court, a district court? Okay, habeas corpus hearing for someone who was detained, claimed they were a gang member, a legitimate discussion for, I think all of us would agree, no matter who the president is, the idea of scooping someone off the street with no independent judicial hearing on that person. Or, look, guys, we talked about last one, birthright citizenship. There's some legitimate arguments on either side. But other than that, this calling him a king, the executive branch, is one, they provide no facts. Two, history seems to support everything he's doing. Three, I'll throw it back to all of you guys. He seems to provide legal reasoning in every single thing he does. I can't say I studied Obama or Biden. Certainly, I didn't recall reading anything about why Biden thought he could forgive debt. Spend your guys' money and people listening's money to forgive someone's, degree. But certainly, I've seen the Trump administration trying to assert what they believe is their authority.
Yeah, that was really well put, Chris. And I think maybe we should talk real quick, and then I've got some stuff about the founders I want to get into in the Federalist Papers. But I think maybe Kay Carl or Mike, well, let's kind of discuss what the scope or authority of the executive branch is. Like, I think most people realize that, the executive branch commands the armed forces, but can't declare war, right? So what are some of the other things that maybe our listeners may not be aware of, and maybe they will be aware of, and they'll let us know in the comments that, hey, we know this stuff and you guys are talking to us like we're in 8th grade. But, I think it's one of those things you don't really hear very often in the news, is what is the actual authority of the executive branch?
I go ahead and dive in, Michael. I just threw something out there to y'all. I just had a thought. When you take a look at executive branch, and I put up there, the strength of it lies not in what they control, but how they protect liberty. That's the strength of the executive branch, and that's what I see as some of the things that Trump's doing, and what Abraham Lincoln was all about. So it's not necessarily about control. When I look at the left, honestly, it was about controlling our lives. It wasn't about advocating our God-given rights and protecting liberty. That's what we should expect from our leaders, especially the executive branch. Make sure our God-given rights are protected. When sometimes government, Congress, depends who's in charge, try to take away those rights, and once they take them away, it's hard to get them back.
Absolutely. Let me just add this. One of the things that most people aren't aware of is that the progressive president Woodrow Wilson, and then further on with FDR, they began to expand the executive branch. The whole idea was to make the executive a more powerful branch. So when you start to take a look at all of the various different administrative offices that we've got, the EPA and the like, what you'll discover is that, and we'll talk about that more, it's specifically what we call the fourth branch of government, right? But I think it's very important to know that these other branches were put there to really expand the power of the executive branch. And the dynamic that we see is that when progressives and our Democrats have control over the White House, over the Congress, over the judiciary, what you see is that they leverage that additional power and do things that really inhibit or go against liberty. And then, of course, when you have a Republican in place, they claim that that Republican is a king.
You know, that was really, Michael, the beginning of the intellectual liberal elite.
Yeah.
If you look back at history, there was this idea that the common man, even a representative that's elected every 2 years, they come from Kansas and Oklahoma and a place called New Mexico, or those wild people down in Texas. What do they know? And so the idea was, we'll get smart people and they will tell us how to do things. And think about how this metastasized. Then FDR, an intellectual liberal elite from New York City, a multimillionaire who grew up in mansions along the Hudson, says, wow, we cooperated with General Motors and all these companies to really out-manufacture our way to win World War II. And that's history. But they said, well, let's take these very smart people who ran these big companies and they'll start to run our agencies. So think about where that got to. And wasn't it Eisenhower that warned about, what was it called? The military industrial complex?
Absolutely.
Well, fast forward to COVID, the pharma industrial complex, where anybody who dissented said, you know, these vaccines might have a side effect, or gosh, just getting it over it naturally has a higher efficacy, 98% effectiveness, higher than the vaccine itself. Well, it saved lives. The point being, there's been this diminishing of common sense and this elevation of supposed experts. And look where it has us. So interesting point that we will cover it, but it's expanded the executive branch's ability to really control a great deal of our society.
That does really make a lot of sense and kind of hits home with, you know, how things have been going lately, and, you know, bringing up COVID and stuff like that. Now we're probably never going to get monetized on YouTube. So thanks, Chris, for that one. But
I didn't mention any companies. I mean, I love Aspen.
Yeah, no, I'm just kidding. But, you know, like Mike, you were saying about the separation of powers, and James Madison in Federalist 47 said that the accumulation of all powers in the same hands must be justly pronounced the very definition of tyranny. So if you start looking at when judges start legislating, executive branch starts making laws by fiat, we're walking towards that tyranny. And I think that's kind of what you hear a lot on the left-wing news, is they try to spin it as that's what's actually happening. But like Chris brought up a few minutes ago, is that Trump, you know, whether you like him or not, he's backing up what he's doing. You know, he's not just frivolously like Biden saying, oh, we're going to cover all your student debt and you don't have to pay for it anymore. He's actually bringing in legalese into what he's doing or trying to accomplish. And I think that's an important thing that we really need to not focus on, but make sure people realize that here you have on one hand somebody who's trying to, whether you like MAGA or Make America Great Again or not, you know, he's backing up what he's doing, as opposed to others who just at the whim, or whether it was Biden or not, we don't even know with the auto pen stuff, if that was, you know, he's just doing it, you know, haphazardly without any legal backing on what he's doing.
For them to attack President Trump like they have, I mean, whenever he breathes, there's something wrong with that. So it's really not surprising when it comes to protecting our liberties, they're going to attack him, because that's what the left does. They have to really make Americans really hate this guy in order to minimize the effectiveness that he's having. Excuse me. So whenever the left does something, man, or come out and say something, I'll automatically take the opposite opinion, and most of the time I'm right.
Yeah.
Because they have an agenda to destroy and to tear our country
Boy,
apart and to smear the name of those who are their political opponents.
you know what? We talked about the role of the courts, and I mentioned a couple of court cases. I mentioned a great newsletter service last week with court cases, and their attorneys with posts on there that are very virulent against Trump. But I'll give them this: they make a cogent, persuasive argument, for example, on why the laws out there do not afford the executive branch the scope to negotiate any tariff at any time in any place. They're arguing that the various legislative, not a constitutional matter, but from a matter of grants of authority from Congress, that he's exceeding him. I think those are legitimate debates one could have. What's fascinating, you guys, though, is as our modern age sort of put more chips in the executive branch now, just simply that it can act faster, and it must act faster. It must make decisions. And you look at Congress, and I don't think they passed a real bill other than these continuing resolutions in decades. Maybe here or there, maybe we'll see more activity. We're hopeful of the current Congress. But is the modern age sort of change what is demanded of a chief executive now?
Chris, I really don't think so. I think that what we're talking about are like age-old problems, right? They might look a little bit different, but it's, it boil down to the notion of, are we defending liberty? What's the role of government, right? The role of government is to protect our individual rights. So I think that if we look at it in that context, new technology is either going to help free us, right, make us more liberty-minded, or it's going to constrain us. And I think the executive has to have that perspective in mind as they make decisions, and all the decisions.
And that's why it's so important that we have the right person in that office.
Yeah,
Because if we don't have the right persons in office, then the people will feel the pinch of misery and the thing that's been going on previously to this administration. So we got to be involved in the legislative process and make sure we have godly people, um, and people who put liberty first.
First principles first. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we need to
It may
have.
be a little departure, K. Carl and Michael and Aaron, but I'm curious what people think about this. You often hear people accuse Trump of retribution, right? Well, now he's in there and he's getting retribution. But if, to your point a second ago, we don't hold our country and our officials accountable for the laws, when you have non-feasance or non-action, so you don't enforce our immigration laws, you just refuse to do it. We've had Obama, we've had Biden literally refuse, and some say now Trump's doing the same thing with this TikTok. Congress said get rid of TikTok, not in the United States, and people are upset, perhaps rightfully, that that's the law, and Trump seems to be just avoiding it. So on this matter of accountability versus retribution, I just saw breaking news that the FBI is looking like they are investigating Brennan and Comey. And what's interesting is they appear to be narrowing the scope to perjury and other crimes that are very specific, even though a lot of people want then be held accountable for a ton of stuff, they're zeroing in. So can the executive branch, and should they, hold past presidents and their executives? Remember, that's the executive branch. So Comey worked for Biden, right? Brennan it's another agency that reports the executive. Should they go back and hold them accountable? And what about the charges? Well, it's retribution. If we do that, it'll be political warfare forever. What does an executive do?
Yeah. Oh, well, let me just add to that, Chris, that Brennan is proclaiming that the crime that he is being accused of is just an authoritarian move by the Trump administration. So
soundbite defense, always good with the media on your side.
If you break the law, it looks like you violated the law, we're gonna come after you. Come on, I don't care what party you're in. It doesn't matter. We have to have the moral courage to be truth tellers, and that's what we need more of from our so-called leaders.
And
Yep,
guys, this is
absolutely.
how insidious this is. And Aaron, please check me, Michael. All of you look this up. But I swear I read somewhere that this famous Judge Boasberg, remember him?
Oh yeah.
Guess where apparently he served prior to what he's doing now? Does the word FISA court ring a bell?
Really?
If that's true, if this guy came, and apparently one other judge was on the FISA, these are guys who allowed them to lie to the court. They were caught lying, and there were no consequences. I could be wrong on that. You guys might check it. But if that's true, it shows us the insidiousness of the opposition really trying to install people in particular cities and states that will give them cover and allow them to keep doing what they did. If it's true they're from the FISA court, I think they should be impeached as judges.
Absolutely.
And that's the problem. Once we start putting people in jail for breaking the law, a lot of stuff will stop. But
Absolutely.
they know they can get off. Come up with these silly arguments that they're somehow protected because it happened in the previous administration. You didn't catch me back then. Now you want to catch me 6 years later. No, we're going to come after you anytime and every time because you're accountable to the American people, not to those who put you in power in terms of your buddies or your cronies. It's the American people you're accounted to. I heard this. What did Lincoln say? The government for the people, by the people, of the people shall never perish. That's what we have to make sure of.
Yeah.
Put people in office who can do that.
One of the charges, Aaron, that you read about is this claim that Trump is leveraging the presidency for commercial gain for his sons, his real estate. He tried to have a meeting at one of his resorts, on and on and on. And then, of course, taking a gift, was a guitar, wanting to give them an airplane. And I wonder, I just throw this sort of perplexing riddle out there. So Trump seems to be doing everything out in the open. He's probably one of the most wealthiest people who entered into the presidency, unlike the Bidens and Obamas and Clintons who ended their presidencies as both multimillionaires or billionaires. Trump was the opposite. So it's all out front. And here they claim these things. Would it not be impossible if someone has a real estate empire around the world that there'll be a constant litany of things he supposedly promoted himself all out in the open, while we just looked at a presidency who it's now clear was operating a shakedown racket with his brother. I forget Joe Biden's brother's name, and then Hunter. So we know that happened, yet they attack. How do we reconcile, or how do people reconcile those differences?
I mean, for me, I think when you look at it, like you said, Chris, there was an obvious mob type mentality with some of these past presidents where they were, like you said, shaking people down. You know, what was that famous interview that the previous administration was in, and basically said, well, if you don't fire this guy, you're not going to get the money, or the attorney, or whatever it was. And then, oh, lo and behold, he was fired. And I think the difference is there's, you know, in that previous administration, a lot of things were done behind closed doors and back alley deals, and, you know, and in the back room of a restaurant under like the shady light and smoke of like an old movie theater or old movie. But then you look at what Trump's doing, and if I turn on, you know, Newsmax, he's selling his Trump watches. And listen, just because you're the president doesn't mean I don't personally feel that as a business person that he can't run his businesses, and he's out in the open. And if you don't want to buy a Trump watch, don't buy a Trump watch, you know? And I think trying to bring in his family, saying, oh, well, his family's doing shady dealings. Well, nothing they're doing has been behind closed doors. It's all out in front and in the open. And I mean, the guy will sit there and take 45 minutes to an hour's worth of questions from the press, which was never done in the previous administration because everything was being hidden on who was actually running the country. And now we have somebody who's out in front, leading from the front and not from behind, and saying, this is what I'm doing. This is what my kids are doing. This is how we're making America better. We're putting tariffs in. We're doing this. We're doing that. And I think there's such a Trump derangement syndrome, as they say, that even if he was to cure cancer and AIDS right now, they would still find some reason why he's a bad person. Like, they just can't get over the fact that, hey, we're all humans. We all bleed red. We're in this great country together, and we're trying to make our country as best as we can for our coming generations. And it's very interesting how things are spun and looked at depending on what side of the aisle you're on. And I like what Kay Carl had said earlier. If you broke a law, regardless of what your party's affiliation is, you need to be held accountable for the laws that you've broken, regardless of whether it was last week or 4 years ago. You broke a law, of course, of statutes of limitations. But if there was something you did, you need to be held accountable for it. And if you're writing on Instagram and taking pictures of 8647, well, then you need to be looked at, because that's inappropriate as far as I'm concerned, regardless of who the president is. So with that being said, we are getting close to our time. And I just want to bring up one other thing, going back to the founders. I think that and I like to hear everybody's opinion on this, that the founders expected the branches, I think, to challenge each other. And I think that, when you look at the Federalists and Anti-Federalist papers, or specifically the Federalists, you see that they expected the branches to challenge each other to prevent any type of abuse and to protect liberty. I mean, that's how I kind of interpreted things. I don't know if that's right, but I feel like they each, when they were writing the Constitution, that each branch was supposed to stay in its lanes. It was supposed to be challenged by the other branches. That way, we don't have a tyrannical government where all these branches come together under one person. I think that's the story that really the left, I guess, is trying to portray, that all of a sudden now we have Trump who's here and he's controlling everything, when that's really not the case. But
he can't make budgets. I mean, all the money comes from Congress. It's interesting historically, K. Carl, George Washington said very clearly that he did not want to be king. And there are people who said, we want you to be king. He said no. And his resigning, and indeed the first State of the Union address, a lot of things Washington did was sort of set that precedent, that we did want a strong executive for international affairs and things, but that you had to move on. There was not royalty, these sorts of things. And so the framework is fascinating. The courts are taking a larger role right now. Congress, it's interesting, seems to be taking an investigation role in looking into a lot of things that happened. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this auto pen. And when you say the office of the President of the United States, did the Constitution mean an individual or the individual and their staff? What if the individual is incapable? This has happened before. Was it Woodrow Wilson? Who was the president who had the stroke? And it turned out the wife was signing, it was essentially running the White House.
I think you're right. I think it was Woodrow.
So a question for us for shows to come is what this auto pen, it's really put technology into the hands of people who could run effectively a puppet government. And when Biden met with Speaker Johnson, the story goes, and Johnson said, "Why did you do this?" Biden looked him right in the eye and said, "I didn't do that." And Johnson looked back in his eyes and concluded, you might remember from the news clip, he really, I believed him, did not think he had done that, yet the White House had indeed had done it. So how does someone investigate the auto pen and who was really running the White House? A bit scary.
It is my hope and prayer that Fauci's pardon was written by an auto pen, so they can revoke that one.
Yeah. Yep. Well, on a speed round, guys, I find it interesting. Let's bring up Hart. I love Alan Dershowitz, brilliant writer. I'm reading his book right now, The Preventative State. I recommend it to everyone. His podcast is great. But the Trump administration, the president, the executive branch, has appeared to zero in on them as the epicenter, sort of the intellectual elite, and apparently is going to revoke their certification that allows further erosion of funding for Harvard. So all these billionaires are now actually going to have to dip into their funds and their endowments to actually pay their own way. So I find it interesting the executive branch is finding ways to influence. And what's fascinating is they all run to court saying, you can't do that. And in Mass, as we know, we have district court judges that apparently the other day don't even read the brief, just give the injunction. And they were just caught doing that. So this will be fascinating to watch as they start eroding all these places. I want to point out historically, you know what Harvard was the big proponent of? And actually, it's one of the worst Supreme Court decisions ever. Eugenics. They were the big promoters of eugenics. For those of you who don't know, that was to sterilize women who might give birth to a addled or mentally diminished person. Of course, it was pushed, K. Carl, on the Black community. And we all know one of the most evil people ever in the history of the world, Adolf Hitler, loved the same concept. And actually in the Nuremberg trials brought up the U.S. Supreme Court case. So that's Harvard, and that's the intellectual elite. And I know I'm moving from the executive branch to take a shot at those guys, but it's Trump and the executive branch within the authority saying, you don't have the right to everyone's money. Your money, everyone listening to the show is paying Harvard to promulgate anti-Semitism and allowing people to stomp on everyone else's rights, including admitting people based on racist criteria, not merit.
You know what? One of the things that how the left is trying to spin this with Harvard, and I have not found any proof of this. They're saying the reason why Trump is being retaliatory toward Harvard because his son Barron was denied admission. But I can't find any proof of that nowhere.
Right.
But that's the narrative that they push.
Well, if Trump was going to build a gymnasium or that kind of thing, we know how Harvard works. He'd be at the top of the list. But we know a lot going for him. He's white, male, and he's Trump's son. He has to get into Harvard or Columbia are probably pretty darn low. But Aaron, as we wrap up, I liked, because we love capitalism, I want to give a shout out to the Female Edge. My daughter Alexa and her partner Tony Malone out in the Northwest, Seattle, Portland, run a business coaching women athletes, and it's growing like gangbusters. They're great. So check out the Female Edge. And if you have daughters playing soccer, really any sport, they're a heck of a resource. So thanks for guys letting me slip in a little commercial plug for my daughter's
Absolutely
business. And now I'll get her to actually watch the podcast and send it to people.
There you go. That'd be great. So yeah, let's wrap up here. We're just about 37 minutes ish. And I guess, we'll start with K. Carl and work around the screen here, and just your closing thoughts and, any good parting words for those listening for the rest of the week and this upcoming weekend.
Well, my closing thought is a quote from Frederick Douglass, who said on one occasion, "This is no time for the friends of freedom to fold their arms and consider their work at an end. The price for liberty is eternal vigilance."
Wow.
Absolutely. That's good. That's good and powerful as always. Chris, what do you got for us?
I'll just end by saying this. One of the things we try and do, and we feel very strongly about, is getting the proper content and context and historical perspective. And Aaron, on this show, I love talking to you about AI, and I have really enjoyed using Perplexity AI, but be so careful at looking closely at the conclusions these engines give you. In the case of Perplexity AI, I am sorry, but when I asked, well, who's worse, Biden or Trump in terms of executive overreach, the stunning conclusion was, hold your breath, Trump is much worse. Oh my goodness, in all these ways. So I said, okay, let me click on a footnote. Guess who the first footnote was? That great channel, CNN, using a CNN report to substantiate their claim that Trump is far more egregious and authoritarianism. The other one was a group called Crew. Well, I went to their website, looked around. They were one of the ones who funded the lawsuit to try and keep Trump off the ballot in Colorado. About as unconstitutional, ultra-constitutional as you can get. These are the sources Perplexity AI uses to try and tell its millions, I suppose, Aaron, people who use their site, what the facts are. It's blatantly untrue. So I can't speak to ChatGPT and the others there, and I think we should make an exercise on all these shows to check what AI's saying to people and call out.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's great. And for those of you who do use Perplexity, just keep this in mind.
Don't look over here. Nothing to see here. Ooh, look at that.
So yeah, I mean, I too, like AI for research. I like it for bouncing ideas off of. I use primarily ChatGPT. I have one of those platforms where you pay a yearly subscription, you get access to a whole bunch of different ones. I think the imaging that it creates is pretty good sometimes, but again, you have to check everything. And I was listening to another podcast, I believe it was No Agenda, and they were talking about AI and how they can't stand it, and how people have been using it to the point where, like, I'll write something and I'll be like, okay, give me some improvements. It's like putting it through Grammarly. Like, okay, check my grammar. Tell me where I've missed a comma or, a period or something like that. And they actually came out and said that people who use AI to like write an email or school paper 10 minutes later don't remember what they actually wrote because they didn't write anything. They just said, hey, give me a paper on the Constitution. And it writes this, mediocre at best, document. And then when the people are asked about it, they have no idea what they were talking about.
Sounds like a Joe Biden press conference.
Yeah, exactly. You have to keep it in front of you so you know what's going on. But, I think, if, whether you like AI or the language models or not, or, I don't think it's truly AI, so to speak, but it is making leaps and bounds as far as doing research. And now that it has access to the web, it cites stuff. So like Chris was saying, you can go and look at what it's pulling that information from and those citations. But if you don't learn how to use it and you're not incorporating it in what you do, the people that whether you're in business against or if you're a researcher, the other people are using it. So you might as well understand how it works, use it to its limitations, or what it's good for. But again, a lot of it has to do with your prompt and what you're asking for and stuff like that. And I've been using it for a while and I can spot AI written stuff a mile away. It's always, I hope this email finds you well. Yep, that's AI. And I'm not reading anything past that. So thanks for wasting my time.
We're getting good at spotting it, aren't we?
Yeah, but we should do an episode where we talk about the difference between the different AI platforms, and maybe we ask us some questions live and we see what kind of response we get, and it would be interesting because I think it is kind of whoever's creating the language model, whoever controls that, that's where the bias is going to come from because it isn't actually thinking for itself. Yeah. But anyways, fellas, in that another great.
Yeah, Michael's closing.
Oh, yeah, Mike. Sorry, yes, I got.
I'll just make mine short and sweet. I just want to encourage people to do your research, and in terms of the country that we live in, the place that you got to start is with reading and understanding the Declaration of Independence. Reading the Constitution is very, very short, and then also explore the Federalist Papers, because then you get an opportunity to get a sense of how these people actually really thought and what they were feeling. And after having dug into those three, then I think you have a context set for analyzing and looking at everything that you hear. But if you don't have that foundation, and I see every day and I hear every day people say, oh, that's not constitutional. And I can guarantee you they've never read the Constitution, right? They've just heard somebody else say that wasn't constitutional and they're just parroting it. Yep. So, but do your work. And why do you do that work? Because we have a nation that was built to last. And the only way that it does, the only way that we keep it is if we each understand what it is and what is supposed to be and push to make it so.
Excellent. Well said, Mike. I appreciate those closing thoughts. I think that's, a real thing that, that isn't being taught in schools, and for the homeschoolers, I know the parents teach that stuff, but if you're in your regular parochial schools, that civic stuff isn't really, it's touched on, but I know people that I've talked to and their seniors get out of school and they can't tell you the 3 branches of government, which is sad. So that being said, I just want to let everybody know that we are here every Thursday, 10:30 Eastern Standard Time. All of our contact information will be found in the show notes. You can find us on Liberty Collaborative on Substack. You can find us on YouTube. I think we're going to start maybe posting stuff on Rumble too. Might as well. It's just copy and paste from YouTube. And you can get in contact with us. You can actually hear us if you're listening to this on podcasts on all your the 2.0 podcasting apps. You can hear us on there, so Fountain and stuff like that, and then Spotify or even Alexa. If you ask it to play Liberty Collaboratives, it should come up and play in your kitchen or wherever you have that listening device in your house. So thank you everybody for listening and tuning in, and feel free to email us and ask us questions. We'd love to do that, and then maybe we'll start doing some of these live where people can chat with us through the chat and let us know what they think. So until next time, this is the fellas from Liberty Collaborative. Have yourself a great week and a great weekend.
Thanks for joining us on the Liberty Collaborative. If today's episode lit a fire or gave you clarity, share it and be part of the movement. Subscribe, leave a review, and keep the conversation going. Until next time, stand firm, stay free.